Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a brand new and beautiful day. Welcome to the first day of summer here in this part of Grandmother Earth, in this hemisphere. We welcome summer. And for many of us, yesterday was a celebration of midsummer. Some people are celebrating that today as well. And that is the subject of today's podcast. It's about celebrating the seasons, the changing of the seasons. And from my perspective, as an American mystic, what that looks like, what that can look like, what it has looked like. And I think more than anything, today's podcast, I would really like to focus on the beauty that each of us brings to our own ceremonies and celebrations, about the uniqueness of each and every one of us as practitioners, healers, mystics. There are so many ways to describe who and what we are, and the ways in which we celebrate, the ways in which we hold ceremony, the ways in which we reflect, the ways in which we allow our ancestors to inform us, to move through us, to be present in our lives, just as they are present within our bones, in our ancestral memories, in our traditions that are handed down, and those traditions that we will hand down. As I was getting ready for this morning's podcast, the saying, out of many, one. And for most Americans, well, a lot of people around the world, it's not exclusive to Americans anymore because we human beings are on the move. For most of us, I would say anymore, we represent out of many, one. Out of many cultures, out of many traditions, out of many languages, ceremonies, pathways, beliefs, understandings, relationships with creation, with Creator, all encased in one. Each and every one of us walking this earth journey of a human lifetime. How do we celebrate midsummer, Litha, the first day of summer, the summer solstice, this time of the year? Good morning, Holly Hagen. It's good to have you in the chat room. How do we do that when we are from many, and yet we're all walking this earth together, celebrating hopefully one another's traditions, learning from one another, relearning? In this day and age, there's a lot of talk about cultural appropriation. Who has a right to celebrate this way or that way? Who should be taught this way or that way? Closed practices, open practices, blood quantum. There are so many roadblocks sometimes that get thrown in our way for a variety of reasons. I happen to be one of those people that believes that we should celebrate all of our ancestors, all of them. Whether those ancestors are so far back in our personal history that the DNA doesn't show up in the year 2022, it will one day when the science is perfected, so why exclude them now? And I believe that we should celebrate those within us. Good morning, Sonia. Those within us that maybe 5% or 10% or 20% or maybe 2%. I feel that we should celebrate those ancestors as well. Why relegate them to the back of the bus? Because the numbers aren't as prominent. And I feel that we should celebrate those ancestors that are most prominent in this lifetime. I feel we should celebrate all of our ancestors and all of their traditions. And for some, I understand that, I realize that for some people, celebrating some of our ancestors requires some healing work. I understand that very well. To take a look at maybe the history of certain ancestors or what you were told about certain of our ancestors, or a period of history in which perhaps a portion of our ancestors in this day and age would not be looked at as the models of civility or spirituality or what have you. So I do understand that taking a look and embracing all of the culture and traditions and memories and ancestral ways that live and breathe within us, it can take some time, and I honor that. And for anyone who says perhaps to you, well, but you're only such and such a percent of that. Personally, I feel it's a sad day when we break down who we are by percentages. We are who we are. And particularly here in America, for many, a separation from the motherland or the fatherland that our ancestors came from perhaps is decades long or maybe centuries long. And so the old ways have taken on new ways and they've been blended. Some say, well, they've been Americanized. Yep, they have. And what does it mean for something to be Americanized? Well, for me, it means an embracing of what is here, what was awaiting our ancestors. And if you are a first generation or second generation immigrant to the United States of America, whatever it was spiritually or culturally or community that awaited you, that embraced you, maybe even turned you away. Maybe it's the traditions that grandma and grandpa taught your mom and dad or taught you that have taken twists and turns as the tides of time will provide us. Now, I'm not about to endorse cultural appropriation when clearly something is being culturally appropriated in a system where there are initiations. And there are certain religions, spiritual pathways that require an initiation into them. Somebody reminded me, well, you know, Dana, Catholicism requires an initiation. And I really hadn't thought about it because as somebody who was initiated right from birth, right, with Catholic baptism and 1,000 years of catechism, I forgot about that because for me, that's just the way it always was. It always was that. And at the same time, growing up in a household where I was taught that, or I was taught the Native American principle that everything is alive with the Creator, the stones, the trees, much like St. Francis of Assisi. If you've ever read the Canticle of St. Francis, it reads very indigenous to the Americas. If we go far back in all of our bloodlines, our multiple bloodlines, We have indigenous people. In other words, people that were born right on that continent, pretty much. But when did that continent happen, right? There's so much to learn and so much to know. And that is an individual path to learn our own history. Todd and I were talking the other day because tonight we're going to the Van Gogh exhibit. Hey, Janet Smith, I was thinking about you this morning. Because I follow a young lady on TikTok who teaches the Scottish language. Not that I think I'm ever going to become fluent in the Scottish language, the Scot language, but just listening to her makes my heart feel good. There's something about that language being spoken that sings to my heart. So how do we bridge? How do we bridge? Well, if you want to become Catholic, there are certain things that you have to go through, right, to become a Catholic as an adult. If you want to be a pipe carrier in any tradition, that isn't something that you just make happen either. The way that I've been taught, that is something that is brought to you. It was brought to me. It was brought to my path, and I was initiated and brought into it. But there are parts of us, I think a big portion of us, that understands that we are not separate from Grandmother Earth. We are not separate from Spirit. When our loved ones pass on, they don't float up into the sky, right? They don't gravitate down into some fiery pit either. When our loved ones die, be they four-legged or three-legged or feathery or the two-legged kind, their energy, their consciousness, their intelligence passes into a dimension that is very parallel to ours. Some say they vibrate a little higher, or it's across a veil. They don't float up, they don't float down, they're in a parallel dimension. And that parallel dimension has many layers and subtleties and all of that sort of a thing, of course. But they're right here with us. And we are influenced by that. We are not separate from Spirit. We're not separate from our soul. We're not separate from the trees, the flora, the fauna, the animals, the stones. We exist in and amongst. Isn't that marvelous? So I'm going to take us on a quick journey here. This is from my book, A Book of Enchantments, with the Mystic Angels of Light. And it's on page 135. It's also in my book, Prayers and Incantations to the Light, Blessings from the Mother. This is the incantation to the 5 ethers. I love that word, ether. So I invite you to take a deep breath. Maybe you haven't done that today, or this evening, or this morning, depending on where you are. I invite you to take a deep breath and exhale fully. And become awake and consciously aware of what you feel inside and what you perceive outside of yourself. You can repeat after me inside your mind. You can repeat after me right out loud. The purpose is to be consciously awake and aware. Deep breath. Full exhale. I call upon the presence of the Holy Spirit of water. Please come and bring your sacred gifts to this space. The gifts of intuition, dreams, knowing, psychism, and I give gratitude for the holy waters that exist within my body. I call upon the presence of the Holy Spirit of air. Please come and thank you. And bring your sacred gifts to this space. The gifts of thought, of breath, of intention, and I give gratitude to the air that exists within my body as I breathe and I exhale. I call upon the presence of the Holy Spirit of fire. Please come and bring your sacred gifts to this space. The gifts of passion, the gift of compassion, the gift of wisdom, of life, and I bless the fire of life that exists within my being. I give gratitude. I call upon the presence of the Holy Spirit of earth. Please come and bring your sacred gifts to this space. The gift of balance, the gift of oneness with Grandmother Earth, Gaia. The gift of groundedness, of nurturing, and I give gratitude for the minerals, for the stardust that exists within my body. I am grateful. I call upon the presence of the Holy Spirits. Please come and bring your sacred gifts to this space. I give gratitude for the Holy Spirits of my illuminated, elevated ancestors, to the mystic angels of light, my spiritual guardians and allies, my totem allies, my power animals. I give gratitude for your presence in my life. Holy Spirits of water, air, fire, earth, and spirit, thank you for being present in this sacred space and for blessing me with your sacred wisdom and healing. And so it is. blessings be. Thank you to the being that is the sun. Thank you for all that you give to nurture life. Thank you for my personal growth, the growth of my garden. I send blessings to all of the sun dancers that are getting ready to Sundance here on Turtle Island, to raise their prayers and to remember our relationship to the sun, to the seasons. All of us in the antiquity of our soul remember our relationship to the sun, to the moon tides, to Grandmother Earth, this glorious angel that is alive, this wise being who lives and breathes. All of us. We may not perfectly understand the mystery, the mechanics, but in our soul, in our spirit, in our expansive antiquity, we know something, maybe a lot of something. And like any relationship that we nurture, there are markers in the year where maybe we pay a little more attention. The summer solstice, midsummer, Litha, there are many. Sundance season. I love Sundance season. Those are markers, just like a beloved's birthday, or maybe a wedding anniversary, or the passing of a beloved. Those are special markers in our relationships to others. The passing of the seasons, the turning of the seasons, just like that magnificent medicine wheel. It holds markers where we celebrate our relationship to it, in this case, the sun. Where now the days here in our hemisphere, my hemisphere, some of you don't live in this hemisphere, I understand that. For you, the days are getting longer. Here in the United States, the days are getting shorter, incrementally. But this is a time of growth, of being grateful for the growth inside, outside. Earlier today, Gabriel and I were up in my garden. We were doing some weeding. I'm getting ready to teach a class with my dear friend Claudia Nielsen. And the class deals with herbs and plants as medicines. So I've got sweetgrass, tobacco, I've got cedar, I've got sage growing, I've got dragon's blood, chamomile, rue. I've got all of these magnificent things, angelica, growing in the garden. There are too many to name, in and amongst the tomatoes, the pickles, and the zucchinis. And I am one of those people who talks to the plants. I talk to the tomatoes. I was picking tomatoes this morning, and I was thanking the intelligence and the overlighting spirits of the plants and any of my ancestors that are working in the garden for doing so, but thanking the sun for ripening the hyssop and the wildflowers that I've got growing. I understand that there's a relationship waiting to happen with so many things. It's a matter of paying attention to the offering of relationship. That's part, I believe, of the mystic's path, whether you're an American mystic or a Scottish mystic or a Celtic mystic. I'm also a Celtic mystic. I happen to be a Celt in my blood and in my bones. I'm a Celt that happens to live here in the United States. And I'm also a Norse woman. And I am delighted at the African blood that flows through these veins, along with the memories. And in all of that, there's a relationship to be had. And as I said in the beginning, some relationships, maybe they take a little work. Maybe the relationship that is being offered to go outside and plant a garden, maybe that's something of a challenge for somebody. So maybe growing some ivy in the house is an option. During solstice, summer solstice, midsummer, I like midsummer. I am a huge fan of BBC because BBC has wonderful shows that are in Scotland, they're in Wales, they're in all of these places that my heart knows, my soul knows. And so I watch BBC programs, and one of them that I love is Midsummer Murders. Love that. It speaks to me. And at the same time, being at Sundance out west speaks to me. My sisters were supposed to be here last month, and it had to be canceled due to Todd traveling and getting COVID, and being very mindful of my elder sisters and knowing that they absolutely do not need to be around anything that might threaten their health. Even though we've all been vaccinated and boosted and all of that, we had to be very cautious, even though it was a very mild case here, being very cautious. And so rescheduling them to come in August took into consideration that this is Sundance time. In fact, I was talking to my sister Barbara yesterday, and she was in between things that she had going on heading up to Sundance for cousin Loretta. She has a Sundance up in the Black Hills every year, honoring the sun. One of the ways that I think is a really fun way of honoring our relationship with the seasons is by having a garden. And maybe that garden exists of one thing or two things. I have blueberry bushes out in my garden as well, because that's part of what's known as wojapi. Wojapi. It's a pudding kind of sort of thing made out of blueberries. And here in Michigan, we're pretty famous for our blueberries. And I like to bring blueberries out west to the reservation when I go, or I like having them here for when my sisters come and we can make wojapi from fresh blueberries. It's a spiritual food for our body and for spirit. So for me, honoring the seasons means growing seasonal things in the garden. Like the sweetgrass and the sage. In fact, the whole front of the school now, all of that grass is now sweetgrass. It's growing, it's prolific here. It's magnificent. And growing the hyssop, which I will dry and take care of. Claudia and I, as I was saying, are getting ready to teach a class in those. How to work with the herbs. How to grow them, how to dry them, how to awaken them from their slumber, awakening them from their dried place. Always, even in the oregano and thyme and rosemary that I grow in my herb garden, along with various other things dill and parsley and stevia. I've got all of that growing. And I do hang some to dry in my pantry. It smells so wonderful in the autumn and the winter to walk into the pantry and smell those things. But as I pull them off of the stem and before I place them in my food, I talk to the spirit of that plant to awaken the spirit of that dried plant. And I thank it for spicing up my food. Food is medicine. Growing our own food is a special medicine because we interact with the rain and the sun, the shade. And we all have our own unique way of doing that. And what I'm here to say is, because so many of us are of many, using our intuition, using our own way of speaking to creation, in our creating or co-creating, it's going to be unique to every one of us. There is no way, one way, I believe, personally, that there is not just one way to speak to creator or creation, but there is the way that is from our spirit and our soul. To dance our own midsummer dance. And maybe you were taught a midsummer dance. Maybe you watched that movie Outlander, or the show Outlander, right? I did. One day I will dance in those stones. And there are days, quite frankly, here in the enchanted forest, in my ancestral, if you follow me on Instagram, the Temple Within on Instagram, I do most of my posting on Instagram anymore, the Temple Within. For me, it's not as chaotic as Facebook. So I choose to post more on the Temple Within on Instagram. But I post photographs of the ancestral circle. And there are times when I am inspired to let that part of me, that very large part of me that is of Scottish descent, to dance in the ancestral circle. And in that moment, I ask those of my ancestors from the Highlands of Scotland, even those that were pushed out due to war, they were pushed into what we now call other parts of the UK, Wales, England, Ireland, but who sprouted out of the craggy rocks of Scotland to move through me. And I move with it. Just as I invite my African ancestors to move through me at times of celebration, or just because I'm feeling moved, or my Dutch ancestors, right, who came from many places to occupy what we now know as the Netherlands, my Norse ancestors, and my Germanic ancestors. I invite them to move through me. And of course, my Native American ancestors. And sometimes they all want to move at one time, which brings something very unique. And that's the whole point of today's podcast. Sometimes they all want to move simultaneously to create something new and vibrant and beautiful. And I think that that is astonishing and fantastic and should be celebrated. Celebrate it. Holly is saying, I found out not too long ago that way back I have some Scottish lineage. I had no idea. Isn't that wonderful? It is. My great-grandfather, they just called him Mac. His middle name was MacDonald. And the photos of him are precious. His story is not always easy. But our story isn't always easy. And I hope that the end of my days, what I leave my children and my grandchildren and nieces and nephews, is the understanding that our origins in the beginning are stardust. Before we came to this magnificent being called Grandmother Earth. She goes by many names. And that each of us is unique and to be celebrated. And those that came before us are to be celebrated. Even if it's all at once, and uniquely you. I celebrate you. I thank you for supporting my work at the Temple Within. Thank you for giving this podcast a like by clicking that star. Thank you for listening to me on YouTube or Apple, wherever it is that you find me. Celebrate yourself today, this evening. Connect with that inner sun, the fire of life, the fiery part of yourself. And have a magnificent, magnificent day, evening, dream time, wherever you happen to be. Blessings be, everybody. Get out there and shine as only you can shine.